Kate Middleton and Prince William are on the move again. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge visited Wales on Tuesday to celebrate their national holiday, St. David's Day.
On a brisk London morning, Heathrow Airport's usual rhythm was disrupted by a scene no one saw coming. Princess Charlotte, dressed simply and without royal fanfare, walked through the terminal unnoticed until staff, unaware of her identity, made a shocking decision and escorted her out. Whispers spread, eyebrows raised, then everything changed. Prince William arrived, not with shouting, but with a calm, commanding presence that froze the room. What unfolded next left airport staff stunned and deeply regretful. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It became a moment the royals won't soon forget. Ignored and alone, Princess Charlotte's shocking airport ordeal. A sharp gust swept through the entrance of London's Heathrow Airport, tugging at coats and scarves as passengers rushed to catch early flights. Inside, the terminal buzzed with familiar chaos. Loudspeaker announcements echoed overhead. Children wailed over lost toys. Business people typed furiously on laptops, and the aroma of burnt coffee drifted from nearby cafes. In the middle of this everyday whirlwind, a sleek black SUV eased up to Terminal 5, barely drawing attention. The door opened, and out stepped someone who was anything but ordinary, Princess Charlotte of Wales. At just 9 years old, Charlotte was no stranger to the public eye. But this morning, dressed in a plain navy jacket, dark jeans, and white sneakers, she blended into the crowd like any other child. There were no grand arrivals or flashing cameras. Her soft brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her only accessory was a small carry-on bag. Yet despite the casual look, there was something regal about her, an invisible aura that demanded a second glance. Unfortunately, no one gave her that second glance. She wasn't here for a royal engagement filled with photographers and waving crowds. She was heading to Edinburgh to attend a children's charity event, something her parents had encouraged as part of her early royal duties. Prince William and Princess Kate had always tried to give their children as much normalcy as possible, and today, that meant letting Charlotte travel with minimal fuss, just like any ordinary young girl. But as she stepped into the crowded terminal alone, without a single security guard in sight, that sense of normal quickly unraveled. Clutching her ticket tightly, Charlotte approached the check-in counter, nerves fluttering beneath her quiet confidence. She was prepared, or so she thought. Behind the desk stood Sarah, a young staff member already exhausted by the morning rush. The last thing Sarah expected was to come face-to-face with royalty. But to her, Charlotte looked like any other preteen. Sweet, polite, and perhaps a little shy. Certainly not someone who needed special treatment. "Next, please," Sarah called out, barely lifting her eyes from the screen. Charlotte stepped forward and slid her boarding pass across the counter. "Good morning," she said with a gentle smile. Sarah muttered a quick greeting, but as her fingers moved over the ticket, she froze. Her gaze narrowed at the elegant crest embossed at the top, a detail far too rare for a child traveling alone. She peered at Charlotte, suspicion growing in her eyes. "Is this your ticket?" she asked, her voice stiff. "Yes," Charlotte replied, her cheeks warming under Sarah's stare. "Do you have any ID?" Charlotte hesitated. Should she say it? Her parents had taught her to be humble, to never flaunt her name. But was this the time to speak up? "No ID, but I am Princess Charlotte of Wales," she said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. For a moment, Sarah didn't respond. She simply stared, trying to make sense of what she just heard. Her fingers instinctively reached for her radio. "One moment," she said, and turned away. Charlotte's heart began to race. The voice in Sarah's earpiece crackled, and the tension in the air shifted, like the calm before a storm. A second staff member appeared, older and more serious. He examined the ticket, then looked at Charlotte. His expression was unreadable. "Do you have anyone we can contact?" he asked. "My father is Prince William," Charlotte replied with practiced calm. "You can reach Kensington Palace for confirmation." He nodded and turned back to Sarah. "Verify it immediately." Charlotte stayed still, her fingers gripping the ticket as if it were a lifeline. This was supposed to be a simple check-in, a quiet flight. But now, she was being studied like an imposter. Whispers began to float behind the desk. Another staffer named Frank joined in, squinting at her like he was trying to solve a riddle. "Sorry, miss," Sarah said finally, still not convinced. "We need to confirm your story. It's highly unusual for a minor to be traveling alone in business class." Charlotte blinked. Her seat was valid, her purpose clear. But none of that mattered if they didn't believe her. "It's my seat," she said softly, holding back frustration. But Sarah had already turned away, typing rapidly. Charlotte stood alone, caught in a moment where royal blood meant nothing and suspicion clouded every glance. Minutes crawled by. No one offered comfort. No one offered help. And still, no one recognized her. The world spun on as if she were invisible, until the staff quietly motioned for her to be moved to the waiting room. But why exactly was she being isolated? What silent alarm had been triggered behind those whispers? "Stay with us," because the answer may shock you. Trapped in the waiting room. Charlotte stood frozen as Sarah turned back to face her, her expression unreadable, like a mask no one could see behind. The calm, almost mechanical tone in her voice made it worse. "I'm afraid I'll have to escort you to a holding area," she said firmly. "We need to verify the payment for your seat." It wasn't a request. It was a decision already made. Charlotte's heart raced. This was no longer a small mistake, not a minor hiccup. Something had changed. The tension in the air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. Charlotte swallowed hard, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "My parents," she began, her voice tight with confusion. But Sarah was already signaling to someone nearby. A man in a navy blue uniform approached, his steps brisk and steady. His shoulders were squared, and his voice carried a tone that left no space for negotiation. "Please, follow me." Everything around her slowed as she scanned the bustling airport one last time. People were laughing, checking luggage, grabbing coffee, but none of them looked her way. Not one recognized her. To them, she was just a young girl in a coat. Standing awkwardly alone in a terminal she should have breezed through like royalty. She thought of her parents. Surely they had no idea this was happening. They had told her this trip mattered, that she was ready to represent something larger than herself. Yet here she was, being walked away like a problem no one wanted to deal with. She followed the man silently, her small frame barely making a sound as her shoes touched the tiled floor. Around her, adults towered like statues, moving with purpose while she was guided in a direction that felt like nowhere. She remembered her training, grace under pressure, composure in public, never losing control. No crying, no drama. Keep it together. They reached a side room. The lights buzzed like insects above her head, flickering slightly, as if even they were unsure what came next. The space was plain, stripped of comfort, and the door closed behind her with a soft, chilling click. The silence inside was almost too loud. Charlotte's hand tightened around her boarding pass, as if it were the only proof she had of belonging here. Then the door opened again. A different staff member entered, older, with tired eyes and a name tag that read George. He looked at her, then at the ticket in her hand. "I apologize for the delay," he said briskly, "but we can't process your boarding pass until we verify it. The system flagged it for review." Charlotte's chest tightened. "Flagged," she repeated, her voice shaking slightly. "But my parents are expecting me, in Edinburgh. They're waiting." George nodded slowly, his lips forming a thin, uncertain line. "I understand," he said, not unkindly, but without room for debate. "But without confirmation of payment, you can't board the plane." Her jaw clenched. She wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. George turned to another staff member. "Call the number on file," he instructed. "Let's clear this up." Charlotte stood still, her breath even and slow despite the panic she felt rising inside. Her parents were unreachable at the moment. Deep in engagements she wasn't supposed to disturb. She knew that. They had promised this trip would help her grow, prove her readiness. But this felt like punishment for simply showing up. Time dragged. The room never changed. The buzzing lights hummed above. The air felt stale, and voices outside the door reminded her that the world was still moving while she remained frozen in place. She glanced at the staff across the desk. Frank shook his head, and Sarah still wore a look of restraint, but it was thinner now. Something was happening. She didn't know what, but she could feel the air shift around her like the room itself had taken a breath. Then George picked up the phone. His voice was low, urgent. Sarah's eyes flickered toward the screen, brows slightly furrowed. One of the men leaned in to whisper something. It wasn't loud, but Charlotte felt every syllable ripple through the air like a hidden signal. Something had changed. Then the door opened again. Another figure entered. This one different. His uniform was sharper, every detail crisp, and his presence carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. He didn't look around. He looked directly at Charlotte, then without a word to her, he turned to George. "We need to move quickly." Charlotte's breath caught. Move? Where? Why now? Her pulse thundered in her ears, and she felt the sting of helplessness rise again. But before she could ask a single question, something far more unexpected happened. The arrival of her father. But why did his face, instead of bringing calm, leave everyone in the room suddenly speechless? Stay tuned. Prince William walks in. The air in the small side room grew stiff, laced with discomfort and quiet panic. Staff members fidgeted by the wall, whispering nervously while glancing toward Princess Charlotte, who sat silently, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. Her ticket had finally been verified, but the damage had already been done. She had been made to feel like an outsider, unrecognized, doubted, and cast aside, all because she didn't wear a tiara or have a security guard flanking her sides. But then, in a twist that none of them saw coming, the door creaked open once more. Everyone turned. For a second, the staff assumed it was another supervisor arriving to clear the confusion. But as the figure stepped into the room, all breath seemed to catch at once. This wasn't a manager. It wasn't another traveler or a security officer. It was Prince William. Tall, composed, and unmistakably royal, he entered with a calm power that made the entire room feel smaller. His eyes locked immediately on his daughter. And in that moment, Charlotte's expression changed. From composed defiance to barely contained relief. Her father was here, and not just as a parent, but as the future king. The staff froze, mouths parted slightly. Sarah, the staff member who had first challenged Charlotte, paled instantly. She instinctively stepped back as William's gaze shifted slowly across the room. No words were needed yet. His presence alone was enough to summon accountability. "Can someone explain why my daughter was removed from the terminal?" Prince William's voice was steady, controlled. But there was unmistakable heat beneath it, the kind that demanded answers. Now, Sarah stammered, her professionalism unraveling. "Your Royal Highness, we didn't realize. There was confusion. Her ticket was valid." William cut in, his tone firmer now. And she identified herself, yet she was questioned, doubted, and placed in this room as if she were a security risk. A 9-year-old child. Charlotte remained quiet, watching as her father's protective instincts took over. The man beside Sarah, Frank, stepped forward, clearly shaken. "Sir, we deeply regret the misunderstanding. We had no idea." William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You had no idea because you didn't listen, because you assumed, because you saw a young girl traveling alone and thought she didn't belong." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's voice cracked slightly as she spoke. "Your Highness, I'm so sorry. I only followed protocol. We didn't mean any harm." "But harm was done," William replied. "What you meant is irrelevant. You humiliated a member of the royal family and, more importantly, a child. My child." The emotional tension reached its peak as Sarah's composure crumbled. Her voice trembled. Please accept my apology. We never meant to cause distress. We're begging for your understanding." William looked at Charlotte, his features softening slightly. "Are you all right?" Charlotte gave a small nod. "I'm fine now, Daddy." He turned back to the staff. "Let's ensure this never happens again." Frank nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, sir. Measures will be taken." Almost instantly, the energy in the room shifted. Apologies came tumbling out. The staff scrambled to smooth things over. Charlotte's ticket was reissued with apologies scrawled in their body language more than their words. A manager offered her a voucher. Another nervously asked if she'd like to be escorted personally to her gate. But William, with a curt nod, declined. "We'll handle it." As they turned to leave, heads bowed around the room. Staff who just minutes earlier had doubted her were now visibly shaken, whispering about the royal confrontation that would surely echo through Heathrow's halls for days to come. What had started as a quiet misunderstanding had exploded into a royal reckoning. And even though Charlotte had said little, her calm presence spoke volumes. Her father had spoken for her, but the lesson had been taught by both of them. As they exited the room, Charlotte stole a glance back at the stunned faces behind them. Part of her still wondered, would they be whispering about this later out of embarrassment, or would they change? Now, aftermath, conversation with the father. But what exactly would William say to her once they were alone? Stay close. Because what came next wasn't just fatherly concern, it revealed a deeper royal truth no one saw coming. A father's powerful lesson to Princess Charlotte. Charlotte walked beside her father, Prince William. Her small fingers curled around him as they moved through the terminal's private corridor. Her steps were quiet and composed, almost too calm for someone so young who had just endured the most humiliating morning of her life. Her mind was still tangled in the questions, the stares, the cold room, and the fluorescent lights that had buzzed like angry insects above her head. And now, here she was, walking alongside the future king, not because of ceremony or celebration, but because everything had gone wrong. Prince William glanced down at her, his face unreadable but his grip reassuring. "You held yourself well today," he said, his voice low but brimming with weight. Charlotte didn't reply immediately. What could she even say? Her father hadn't been there when she needed him most, when strangers looked at her like she was no one, when staff questioned her name, when a room full of adults acted like she didn't belong. "I don't think they recognized me," she finally muttered, her voice barely more than a breath. William sighed softly, almost guiltily. "That's possible," he said, "but that doesn't make it right." She looked up at him, surprised. There was no royal poise in his tone, no careful avoidance of difficult truths, just honesty. "Do you think they treated me like that because I wasn't with you?" she asked. The question hung between them like a fog, thick and uncomfortable. Prince William stopped walking for a moment. The hallway was quiet, guarded, cleared for their passage. "Some people respect uniforms," he said carefully. "Some respect wealth, but not everyone sees value in what they don't understand." Charlotte nodded, but the ache in her chest didn't go away. "They treated me like I was lying, like I didn't deserve to be there." William kneeled in front of her so they were eye level, a gesture not of a prince, but of a father. "Charlotte, people see what they want to see. You didn't do anything wrong. You stood your ground. That's more than I could say for most grown men." A pause. Then he added, "But now it's my turn." They resumed walking. As they neared the central security checkpoint, staff who had once looked past Charlotte now froze at the sight of Prince William. One officer nearly dropped his radio before standing upright and nodding quickly. "Your Royal Highness," he said, visibly nervous. We're sorry for earlier. There was a miscommunication." "Was there?" William asked, his voice suddenly sharp. The officer's mouth opened, then shut again. He didn't know how to respond. Charlotte watched as her father handled the moment with the kind of power she hadn't yet understood until now. He didn't need to shout. He didn't demand apologies. He simply was, and that was enough to tilt the world around him. He turned slightly, just enough to glance down at his daughter. "Stay close," he said, and she did. As they passed through security, this time without questions, without stares, Charlotte noticed the way everyone moved around her father, like gravity bending toward a star. And she realized that maybe it wasn't just about being seen. It was about being felt. Back in the lounge, Prince William sat down, the weight of the morning settling into his posture. Charlotte sat beside him, glancing around the elegant room filled with hushed conversations and silver teapots. It couldn't have been more different from the tiny, cold waiting room she had been locked in earlier. Still, the sting hadn't faded. "It's strange," she said. "A few minutes ago they looked at me like I didn't matter. Now they're bending over backward, William gave a tired smile. That's how the world works sometimes. But remember, people like that can't define you. You do. Charlotte looked away, biting her lip. Do you ever wish you could just disappear for a bit? Not be a prince? William was quiet for a long time. Then, yes, more times than I can count. But then, I remember who's watching. Not the cameras, the people. People who need strength, even when they don't recognize it. That's why we keep going. Charlotte stared at him, processing the words. Her heart still hurt, but something was building underneath it now. Resolve. What they took from her this morning, they'd never take again. Suddenly, a steward entered briskly. Your Highness, the aircraft is ready for boarding. We can escort you to the gate now. William stood, straightened his jacket, and offered his hand to his daughter. She took it without hesitation. As they walked toward the gate, passengers whispered and pointed, not at Charlotte, but at her father. This time, though, she didn't feel invisible. She felt powerful, not because of who she was standing next to, but because of what she had survived. Thanks for watching this royal twist. If you were Prince William, how would you handle the staff's blunder? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.